that's taking off. Moon flyby, okay. I hate this music. Who thought of that?
No-go poll where Flight Director Rick LeBrode will poll the team here in Mission Control on key systems required for the upcoming burn.
This is an unmanned vehicle.
On your screen, you're continuing to get
You
a
can
live
watch it because
view
they
of
have
the
cameras
moon
mounted on it.
taken from one of the
And so
solar
actually on the program I
array
had,
wing or SAW
it was like
cameras
different.
on
You
board
could
the
click
Orion
which camera you wanted
spacecraft.
to watch and watch it going around the moon. You know, it was
Orion
fun.
is traveling at 1,248 miles per hour and is only 2,600 miles away from the moon at this time.
Don't even try to set your cheese stick down.
Wasn't very action-packed. It's very slow.
At this time, we do expect Orion to
Notice it is
complete
moving.
its closest approach to the lunar surface. Orion should be just about 81 miles above the surface of our closest celestial neighbor.
So Horizon was the ship that went there. Artemis was the launch vehicle, right? Is that right? You get the idea. You could watch. I watched the whole thing whenever I got a chance because it was absolutely fascinating and just incredible how, with so many different forces involved and everything, they were able to do that. However, how am I doing? Am I confusing everybody? Let me, so you don't want to be a skeptic, because if we're skeptics, that's bad news. So for Barclay, the answer is this is all the mind of God. This universe is all the mind of God, and all the energy and everything is all the mind of God. And we're constantly in touch with the mind of God, because our minds, our souls, just like the energy that makes up the whole universe, right? So everything's interconnected and involved. So that's where Barclay seems to be going with that. And you can follow that.
Very Eastern conception.
It is. It is.
I remember though in his treatises though, like after he was done like sort of explaining all of that, I think he spent like either the last chapter or the last two chapters just like ranting about how the Christian God is the only God who could possibly like be like this.
Yeah, no grounds.
And that
No
empiricism sucks because it convinces people to not believe
Yeah.
in God.
Yeah. Well, I'm not ready yet to criticize Barclay for that. That'll be when we talk about Hume, who does that. So he's next class, right? So that's coming. So we're almost there. But the quiz question I had for you today was, what did you think of Jonathan Edwards? Isn't that how I phrased it? Yeah, the second quiz question, you see it? Is, what do you think of Jonathan Edwards? So who was Jonathan Edwards? Well, he has the, I think, distinction of being the first homegrown American philosopher and theologian. And he was a revivalist preacher, fire and brimstone kind. It scares the crap out of people, especially. In fact, he was so scary in one of his sermons in one of the churches he had been chosen to preach at, that they fired him because it was too scary. So he was fired from that one and had to go somewhere else to preach. But here's the interesting part. while Berkeley was there, and I should say, how did Berkeley get there? Berkeley came up with the idea of creating a university in the New World, where the British had a lot of colonies, and they were going to need ministers in order to satisfy the need for all of the people that were British that were in these colonies. And so he thought, what we need to do is build a university in the New World where young men from the New World can go and get an education and become ministers and then serve all the churches that they're going to need. And he went to the king and submitted his proposal, and the king said, yes, that sounds terrific. Let's go do it. And so George Berkeley went and decided, okay, I'm going to go do this. First, I'm going to have a wife. You need a wife to go and do something like this. So he went and he got married. I don't know, if he just put an ad in the paper or what, but somehow he ended up with a wife. And they sailed to the New World. But he was planning on building the university in Bermuda. The trouble was you couldn't just build the university in Bermuda because it wouldn't have been able to survive just on its own. So first he went to Providence, Rhode Island in order to create farms that would then feed the university the food in order for it to survive.
How much money did he have?
Well, it turned out that was the problem. Even though the king promised him funding for it, after 2 years in the New World, with all of the books he brought with him to start the new university and everything, and by the way, I think he had 2 children during those 2 years because of the wife, etc. It's hard to have them without a wife, actually. You know how that works. He ended up deciding that the king was reneging on his word and not sending the money, so he went back. But he did leave his books, and he donated them to 2 places. One was a startup school called Harvard, and the other one was a little startup place called Yale. And one of them had a fire and lost those books, but the other one, and I keep not looking up. Maybe you could look. Which library has the remaining books? Which library has the books from George Berkeley? What? How did it get there? I don't know. But he donated his books, and they became the original libraries for those 2 universities. I don't know where they are now, but and since he was the first one to try to originate a university in the New World, even though Harvard was already getting started and so on, he's been honored by Americans, and that's why we've got a California university named in his honor, and some other places also named after Berkeley. And remember Dublin at Trinity College, they honor Berkeley. The library there for the students is named Berkeley Library. Although, according to the article that I've got to read when I get home, they're going to change the name because it doesn't fit with their values today? What? I'm thinking this is the woke business. Because clearly, Berkeley was not woke, as you pointed out in the last ranting of the 2 chapters. Interesting. But so, let's take a look at Jonathan. Jonathan's philosophy, even though it's the first homegrown American philosophy, was influenced by George Berkeley while Berkeley was there in Rhode Island for 2 years. There's actually some interesting arguments. There are people that argue that it was actually Berkeley who was influenced by Jonathan Edwards instead of vice versa, because they both end up with similar philosophies, but at the same time, who was first?
I mean, did they have correspondences?
Apparently not.
Well, it's
So-
kind of hard for them to be influenced if they're not
Well,
aware of each other's
Well,
ideas.
he was Edwards was a young man, probably, I think, listened to some of his sermons. They lived close to one another, but he didn't write down that I listened to the sermon of George Berkeley and I'm impressed. So there are books that take both sides of this interesting argument.
It seems to be too much of a stretch for either side. I mean,
Well, it just seems like where would he have gotten these kinds of ideas had it not been from someone like Berkeley, who was deeply enmeshed in all this. Remember, he had a master's and had been teaching in Dublin for I don't know how many years before coming to the colonies. And he was a young man, so it doesn't seem like it makes any sense to think that he's the one that came up with the ideas. I don't know how he would have had them. But we have some interesting sermons. His sermons are famous. By the way, I have an interesting connection to Jonathan Edwards myself, because one of my professors at my alma mater, in fact, he was the chair of the department, Professor George Clagmer, specialized and did his PhD on Jonathan Edwards, and in fact was involved in the edition of his complete works. And it's kind of neat. When he retired and left to move into a retirement home with his wife, where they didn't have very much room, so he had to get rid of books, he sent me the copy of the book that he edited, which was the one of the letters. So I actually have, and he said to Bill, etc. So that's kind of cool. And I never had the nerve to tell him, no, I'm not really that interested in Jonathan Edwards. No, never said that. I can say that now because he's dead and he won't hear me. But Jonathan Edwards, our first American philosopher, he did become the president of Princeton University, even though I believe at the time it wasn't called Princeton. It was called something else. Go away. And if you're interested, this is really good Baptist preaching. And how did he die? This is also interesting. They had a new thing called a smallpox vaccine, which, you know, like they pricked your skin and put a little of the vaccine on you so that you got the vaccine that way. And everybody was afraid of it. It was a new thing, right? And he was confident in the doctors, so he was the first guinea pig. And so they gave him the vaccine and he died.
wait, Edwards?
Yes, Jonathan Edwards. So he died
Wait,
because
they had vaccines back then?
it was a brand new thing, and it wasn't really very well. I killed it. So I don't know how.
It was pretty horrible.
Doesn't say that in the Wikipedia page. That's kind of odd. But
I'm surprised they had
maybe I
vaccines
passed.
back then.
Maybe I passed it. Application, purpose, doctrine.
Because it mentions, currently you're on the book itself, so you have to go to like.
Oh, back to.
Back to him.
Thank
look at
you.
his death.
Thank you. Revivalist, preacher, philosopher, congregationalist,
Probably
theologian.
his death is probably going to be at the bottom.
Biography, he
Yeah,
entered
biography.
Yale College at the age of 13. The following year, he became acquainted with John Locke's essay, etc. So you can see he is getting stuff from there.
I imagine you're going to have to keep going down further and further.
Monument in Connecticut.